what should I do if I don't know how to solve a coding problem? Admit I don't know or waste time and try to learn? Hey everybody, welcome in again. I'm Ethan Evans, and tonight we're going to talk about how to answer hard interview questions. Before I jump into hard questions, specifically example questions, I want to talk a little bit about interviewing successfully. So let's talk about the sport of interviewing. And you'll do better in interviews if you think of it as a sport. And by the way, this goes on both sides of interviewing. So if you're choosing people to be on your team or you're a manager, thinking of it a little bit as a sport you play that you want to get good at will help you. Now, here's the most important thing about it being a sport. When you're interviewing, most of us don't have very much practice. So we don't get very much practice at this sport, and yet our career depends on it. Because you interview, then you work at a job a couple years, then you interview again, and you work at a job a couple years, so you're not interviewing very often. Meanwhile, the person on the other side of the table might be like me. I've done about 2,500 interviews in my life. In the year where I was doing the most hiring, I did 225 interviews in a single year, so I was doing one interview a day. So this is like that classic movie quote. When you come interview with a team of people that are doing a lot of hiring, they're interviewing every day, you're interviewing once every other year, you're bringing a knife to a gunfight. So you don't want your career to depend on luck, because who interviews best right now is going to be not the person who's got the most skill, because no one practices it a lot, but the people who are best at answering on the fly, being surprised, bouncing left and right, talking off the top of their head. Those are the people that are going to do really well. So, if that's not you, if you're not someone who speaks quickly on the tip of your tongue, you want to practice and think about questions beforehand so that you can go in and be prepared. Ms. Moonsong, hello. And everybody who's joined, thank you for coming in. Tonight we're talking about hard interview questions and how to answer them well. So we're going to jump in. Everybody wants, the number one interview question is definitely going to be, why didn't you finish college? And I will do that one in just a second. But before I do that, I have a few points of advice for you. First, for any career, for any resume, you should think through what are the harsh or difficult questions you're going to be asked or could be asked by an interviewer who's kind of a jerk. And you don't want to be caught by surprise and have to stumble over those. So for example, I've been at Amazon almost 15 years. If I was interviewing someone somewhere else, a jerk interviewer could say, well, aren't you kind of an Amazon lifer? Like, how are you going to transition to a different company? Or, hey, you've been working for a huge conglomerate. We're a startup. What do you know about startups? So I can anticipate those questions, and I better be quick and ready to answer why my brain hasn't gone to mush by being at only one company for 15 years, or why whatever. Why I'm able to get into a startup quickly. So you need to prepare in the same way with your own background. And obviously some of you are anticipating this because the question, why didn't you finish college, continues to get votes, and it was also suggested in Discord. So think through the tough questions, be prepared, try not to be caught off balance. And the reason that matters is, for some questions, like, why didn't you finish college? You can't do what I normally advise when you get a tough question. Normally, if you get a tough question and you need a minute to think, it's okay to say, well, let me think about that. Or, okay, give me a second. But with why didn't you finish college, if you're like, give me a second, that doesn't make any sense. And people are like, is he concocting a lie? Like, what's going on here? So for a question like that, you need to know what you want to say about why you didn't answer, you didn't finish college. Now I see here in chat, somebody has asked, how long is too long to wait? Um, uh, how long is too long to wait if you ask for some time? It depends on how unusual the question is. I've had some people interview with me take 30 seconds, maybe a minute. Beyond that, it gets weird. Interviews don't, nobody likes silence. They don't do well with silence. So, um, uh, you've got to fill that space with something. You can ask a clarification if it makes sense. So, to give you an example of a question where you could do this, another question people often want to know how to answer is, if I were to call your current boss and ask him what he was going to say about you, what would he say? It's okay to say, well, let me think about that, what he would relay, and then take a minute to compose yourself. It is not okay on why didn't you finish college. Couple other things. I'm going to recommend you always be honest. You obviously could say all kinds of things about why you didn't finish college, for example, and maybe no one would know the difference, right? My mother got terminal, whatever, nose cancer. You could use whatever you wanted and people wouldn't necessarily know, but I don't recommend that. What I do recommend is that um, you don't have to go into graphic detail. So, for example, let's take a bad situation, one that's common here. Um, when I went to college, I had been in a very strict household and I found myself with a lot of freedom. I'd always loved video games and my screen time had been regulated. And so I found myself playing a lot of games and I got into bad grades and was expelled for low grades. Could be the complete truth. You don't have to go into all of that though. You can simply say, hey, when I went to college, I wasn't as mature as I am today, and I didn't manage my time well. And as a result, I needed to get a job instead. So I left college early to get my life on track. Still true, direct, but not just stabbing yourself and making yourself look bad. So there's a difference between being honest and answering the question and looking bad for no reason. So let me talk for a second then. Finally, the goal when answering any of these questions, very few of them are going to make you look like a hero or get you a job. They're usually jerk questions. Even if the person's not intending to be a jerk, these are questions where what you're trying to do is answer them and move on. So, for a question like, why didn't you finish college? You want to have a soundbite tweet kind of answer, not a War and Peace essay where you just go on and on with your life story of why college didn't work out for you. Because basically, why didn't you finish college is a bad question. It's got a bad implication. The implication is, what the hell's wrong with you that you didn't get this done? Whether that's fair or not, we're not discussing here. Interviews aren't about fairness. So, as Hephaestus says, they're mainly questions to disqualify candidates. So you want to answer them and move on. So whatever answer you choose for why didn't you finish college, you want to answer it and move on. So moderators, you can go ahead if it's not and pin that question on why didn't you finish college, and I'll go ahead and talk about it. And then I have a little more to say. So unsurprisingly, this is a common question. And there are plenty of people with good jobs who didn't finish college. How you answer this depends on your truth as to why. Could be college wasn't a fit for you. Could be your family or you ran out of money. Could be you decided you wanted to change majors, that you had a different job offer, that you found college boring. Doesn't matter why. It matters how you explain that you were in charge of your life or what you've done to put your life on track. So I didn't finish college because reason, here's what I did after, or here's what I'm doing now, here's how my life is on track. Um, so, and Hephaestus says, yeah, is there a way to turn this to your favor? You have to have done something, right? If your honest answer is I didn't finish college because I am unmotivated to work, and then you stare at the interviewer, you are in trouble. You're going to have a better answer than that. But presumably, there are lots of people who didn't finish college but still have skills and motivation. So, with almost every hard question, the basic recipe is acknowledge the problem and then pivot to answering or talking about why everything is great now or how you've handled it. So, I can't answer this from my own experience because I did finish college, but for example, I left my PhD program. So I can say, if someone says, well, why didn't you finish your PhD? I can honestly say, well, in my PhD program, I was in the robotics program. I looked around at my peers, and my office mate was in the 8th year of his doctorate. Meanwhile, the best roboticists in the world were able to produce Roomba. And I realized for me, I wanted to have more impact faster than working 6 to 8 years on a doctorate where the best practical application possible in the 90s was something like Roomba. So I switched industries, went into high-speed networking, and started developing things that could be used today. That answer's a little long, but you'll notice I owned that I left, and then I turned it into what I was doing instead. That's the basic recipe you want with something like this. Ninja, do you feel like there's a lot of merit to utilizing specific skills learned at college? So this is like a different question, but college, ideally, like the model of college, the ancient liberal arts education model was it's teaching you how to think and how to problem solve, and that can be applied across domains. And what specific skills you pick up is more of a side effect. That's mostly true. So I think that's good. All right. So for those of you who may not have been on the show a lot, I often do a rant. And the rants are fun. And they're a chance for me to really get into the mood. So before I go on to other shows or other questions, tonight's rant, I want to say, I know there are some hiring managers here in chat, and I do hiring a lot. And so one message I have that I want to share is if you're interviewing someone, don't use any of these questions as a way like, I'm going to trip this person up, I'm going to put them on the spot, I'm going to see how they do under pressure. Because at that point, A, you're kind of a jerk. And so don't be that person. And B, all you're learning is how that person reacts when surprised or scared. So bonus points for you. You've put them in a rough emotional spot. But that shouldn't be your normal workplace. Now, look, if you're interviewing a courtroom lawyer or an ER doctor, maybe trying to figure out how that person handles a crisis is totally fair. But if you're interviewing an accountant or a software developer or a graphic artist, like, I really need to know how this graphic artist handles being put on an emotionally difficult spot and ask embarrassing questions about their history. That's not useful. So most of these questions, I would advise you stay away from them. Don't be that jerk. So that was a very modest rant, but these are questions that as an interviewer, you should rarely to never ask. If you have a legitimate question, right? Because why someone didn't finish college really isn't about what they can or can't do. If I felt I needed to answer that question, I would say something like, or I needed to ask that question. I would say something like, hey, I see you didn't finish your time at SUNY Binghamton or wherever. How have you developed your skills without that so that you have the same capabilities? Or have there been any gaps you've noticed that college might have covered that you've had to learn on your own? And how have you done that? Those are legit questions. So that's my rant. We'll go to some of the key questions. I'm going to alternate between stuff that was pre-submitted and stuff you voted on. I love that lots of people are voting. So I'll take a voted question first. There's a long one here. Tell me about a conflict you've had with a team member and how you overcame it. We do ask this question because how you manage conflict is a legitimate interview question. And so the first thing is you can anticipate this question and know your story. So don't need to stumble over it. Think through questions like this and know what you're going to say. Now, that doesn't mean you should sound like you're pressing the button on a recording. Oh, yes, let me tell you about the time I had a conflict with my coworker, Jamie. Jamie, and you don't want it to be like that. But how do you answer it? You essentially explain the conflict, and then ideally, you're explaining how you tried to work directly with the person, how you tried to understand their position or needs, and how you tried to find a better solution. And if that didn't work, you then escalated, right? As someone's saying, they're all STAR stories. STAR is the acronym. Again, this is for all interview questions. Situation, task, action, response, or result. What situation were we in? What was the task you were doing? What's the action? What's the result? But in a conflict with team members, what we want to know is that you didn't behave and just dig in and get in a fight, and you didn't undermine the person and throw them under the bus, but you tried to make the conflict about the problem and the customer and resolve it productively. And if you were unable to, you tried to work through others. You don't have to have been successful. It's about your behavior. So what you're trying to show is that you have social skills, that you have professional workplace skills. And so that's the whole point of that question. It's also trying to show that you have backbone. That one of the questions deeper in here has to do with you're asked to do something unethical, for example. So obviously you don't want to do something unethical. And if someone's asking you to do something unethical, that would be a place where you may have to end with, unfortunately, I just couldn't do what they wanted. And I had to tell them, I can't be a part of that. So maybe you had, hypothetically, a conflict with someone over bribing a supplier. Like that would be extreme in a different situation. The other question rolled up in this highly voted question is, what is your biggest weakness? So this is a trap question in many ways. It does get asked a lot. There is no perfect winning answer. Poor answer number one is, oh, I don't have any. Or, no, I think I'm pretty good at a lot of things. Or basically claiming you don't have any weakness. That's lack of self-awareness. So you have to know what you're going to say. And then the only winning way to go about it is to know what you're going to say and say how you're working on it and you're self-aware and you strive to improve. The other thing that is a loser answer to that are the answers that are complete, turn it around into an asset. Oh, my weakness is that I'm a workaholic. I'm so dedicated to the company that I work all the time, and sometimes that stresses me out, but I manage it, right? An answer like that, that's a suck-up answer. An answer that isn't really a weakness. I work too hard. I care too much about the customer. I'm too dedicated to my coworkers. Those aren't real weaknesses. Racine says, I care too much. Yeah, put in here what you would actually say. You don't want to do the suck-up answers, though. What you do want to say is some real weakness. Again, I recommend to be honest. So one of my weaknesses is I'm loud and I make decisions quickly. And so people who work with me can feel like I'm not listening to them and I'm jumping past their input. So I can be honest about that and say, I have this problem. I like to move quickly and I'm usually in the leadership role. And that can lead me to jump to conclusions before everyone feels heard. So that's a fair statement of a weakness. And then I can talk about what I do about it. So what I do about this weakness is I've learned to try to speak last in a meeting. I've seen that modeled. And so speak last, solicit input from the quiet members in the room. And my personal technique, which you've heard recommended here on stream before, is I try to tell people in advance, hey, I have this pattern. If it seems like I'm rushing past you, please interrupt me, or please come tell me offline if I didn't get to your point. So one thing you can do is condition people. All right, I'm going to catch up on chat here for a second. I've been told I have a problem staying in my lane. Dimethyl, I think you should care about that. It's okay to go out of your lane, but not to just be romping on other people's territory. And it's only okay to go out of your own lane when your own job is done well. This is part of what I talk about all the time about how to be successful in your own job. Don't go meddle in other people's jobs until your own job is handled well. So make sure you're doing a good job so you're coming into the other area in a position of strength. If you're nailing your own job, then it's totally fine to expand your ownership and have opinions elsewhere. But even then, I would try to ask questions, not tell. So I think we've covered this one pretty well. I'm going to go to the next question in our extension. I love that so many people are voting. Keep it up. I'll keep answering from there as long as we have high votes. What question should you decline to answer? Any question that is illegal, basically, is the first thing you should decline to answer. So if someone asks you, how old are you? Or do you have a disease that's going to impact your work? Or, hey, I notice you're brown. Are you Hispanic? These are all out of bounds questions. And the right answer for questions like that is, I'm sorry, I don't feel that's appropriate. Would you care to ask a different question? And there's different ways to say that, but you don't answer illegal questions. You just politely say, I don't think that's an appropriate question. Is there something else you're getting at related to my job performance or related to my fit for this job? But also, if somebody's asking you that, maybe if it's a new interviewer, Vagabond, you're totally welcome, by the way. Can they ask, are you single? No, marital status is not related to the job. It's years and years ago, so I can talk about this. I actually think my producer here, Awesome Dave, knew this person if he wasn't involved in the interview. But we had a guy come to the interview debrief and say, I don't think we should hire this guy. His wife, he lives in Southern California, and his wife is a dolphin trainer at SeaWorld. And if he moves here for this job, she's not going to be able to get a job because there's no dolphin training here, and she's going to be unhappy. And I'm like, oh my God, how did you know any of that? And you shouldn't be asking that, and we can't use any of that. It's got to be about whether or not the individual is qualified for the job, not what his wife does. So, but people don't know what they're allowed to ask. And in fact, the biggest place you can get into trouble if you're an interviewer or an interviewee, this is worth covering, because I expected someone would ask this, what shouldn't you answer? The biggest place you get in trouble is not in the actual formal interview on a whiteboard or where people are looking right at you sitting at a table. It's in the small talk. Small talk can get you in all kinds of trouble over lunch or any other break on the way to the restroom. I'll tell a story. There was a company that was caught purposely trapping employees to try and figure things out about their family life. And the way they did it is this. This company had a theory that single employees would work harder than married employees with kids. And so they wanted to find out if people were single, but they knew just saying, hey, do you have kids? We don't want to hire people with kids was illegal. So what they did is they would take people to lunch, And over lunch, they'd send a couple employees with them. And those two employees would start talking to each other about their kids. And they would see if the other person would join in or stay silent. So they, even if those two employees didn't have any kids, they'd say, "Hey, Bob, how's your daughter doing? How was her birthday party?" And, blah, blah, blah. And if the prospective employee chimed in and said, "Oh yeah, my daughter had a birthday party," they were like, "Okay, we know, done. Buy them Taco Bell and we can send them home." And so they got caught, and that's illegal. You can't use that information in job decisions. But the point here is companies are super snaky, can be, about their biases. And there's all this stuff about unconscious bias, but some companies have intentional hiring models, and that stuff's illegal. So any question on that, you should decline. You can't really decline questions that are not illegal or unethical. There might be some examples. If there's other stuff you want to put in chat that you think should be declined, the coaster stuck to the glass. That's yeah. The coaster is the glass is sweating, which is fine. We'll leave it down there. We'll switch coasters. We have a backup coaster because we're prepared. So, let's see. I heard a story about someone that came into an interview and treated the receptionist like shit and got the job refused. That is correct. That has happened as well. Your whole behavior. You shouldn't answer questions on political views. That's the same thing you should decline and just say, my views are my own. I don't bring them to the office. Is there anything you'd like to know about my work? That's the way to politely. What can I tell you about my work abilities is the way to bring all this back on track. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not advising you on how to handle being abused in an interview. That's not my business. But you can bring any sort of borderline inappropriate questions back on track by just saying, "Well, I'm not sure I understand how that's related to what I can do with your company. Can you rephrase the question about my work? Or what can I share about my work?" Ethan Evans, here's a hard question. Yeah, Hephaestus, you can put that one in and we'll vote it up. That's another common one. I'd love to talk about that because there's California law on what people can ask about your earnings. I get why you've asked it now. Are there questions you should decline to answer? In some states, it is now illegal to ask what you make in your current job. You can decline that in an interview if you want and just say, "I'm not prepared to share what I make in my current job. Instead, I'd love for your company to make me what you believe is a fair offer for my ability." You just pivot it that way. Companies now, for example, in some states, they can't ask, "What do you make?" So instead, they can ask, though, "What do you expect to make?" And again, you can choose to give a number if you want. And that's like a whole salary negotiation piece we're not doing tonight. Or you can say, "Well, I'm aware of my market value and I'd love for you to make an offer commensurate with what you think I can bring to your company." And you can say more than that, but you can choose to put it as "you guys make an offer and I'll respond to it." All right. Because giving a number has problems unless you're sure. I've often told companies, so the safer option, Duke of Thought, is name a number. It won't get you the most money, but name a number. It's the easiest thing companies like is, I've looked and people with my experience tend to make, $40,000 and so I'm expecting at least 40,000 is one way to answer the question. And you need to have then done your salary research. But I have sometimes told companies that have contacted me while I'm at Amazon, "Hey, look, Amazon pays me well. I tell the recruiter, in order to consider moving, I need to be looking at something that made financial sense to me, and that would be blah. And so I don't bring it up with the hiring manager or anyone else, but if I want to just find out if a company's even thinking in the right zip code, I do that. So we'll go to the next question. The next question is, how would you talk about your last work experience if it didn't end on a good note? So people leave jobs for all kinds of reasons. How would you talk about your last work experience if it didn't end on a good note? This one's tough, right? Because we all have job experiences that don't go well. And by the way, everyone is leaving some job for some reason, right? So if you're asked why you left a company, you need an honest reason that does not fully badmouth the previous company. Number one, you don't want to badmouth the company. Number two, you don't want to badmouth an individual. You want to talk about a specific aspect of the work, or more importantly, a specific aspect of the new opportunity. And so you can say, as a general thing, when you're asked why you're leaving, you want to talk about what you're headed towards, not what you're leaving. So that's the safest thing, is talk about the positives where you're going. Don't talk about the negatives of where you've been. That's the way to win this question. But if you're being pinned down about, yeah, but you were, let's take a good company, or one that's thought of as being very good. So you're working at Google and someone wants to know, Google, super successful company, high tech. Why on earth, what went wrong at Google? Why did you leave Google suddenly? And it's actually because your boss was a monster, or you were responsible for helping Google implement software to track private citizens, or I don't know, something bad. I don't want to pin anything. I don't know what Google does. It's not about them. The point is, you need to have a crisp answer that says, well, my project at Google evolved, or my project at Acme Inc. I don't want to pick on Google. My project at Acme Inc. Evolved in a way that didn't fit my personal values. And so I'm excited to go see where I can contribute at a company like yours that seems to be building new and innovative things that help people. It's all about pivoting back to why you want to work where you're going. But a variation of this question people have asked is, let's say I've been laid off twice, and I've been asked by people who knew or suspected, why were you laid off? That's one of those questions where you have to have an answer, and it needs to be crisp, and you can't run away from it. So luckily in my case, both companies were downsizing, and it was hard economic times after 9/11. And I was able to say, well, unfortunately, the startup I was a part of was downsizing due to the impacts of 9/11, and I was caught in that. But one of the guys I was interviewing with followed up and still said, well, I know, but you were a leader there. When they were making choices, why did they choose to let you go? And by the way, I didn't get this job. But you have to answer that reasonably. You can say, I don't know. Not a strong answer. You can say my particular job function was not the most critical, which is what I did talk about, that I owned in part recruiting. And obviously when we're downsizing, you don't need the guy who's leading recruiting. But sometimes there's no great answer. And so in that case, though, if your last experience didn't end on a good note, you want to talk about what you learned and how that's educated you on what you're looking for. And so I could, for example, say, well, what I learned is that my skill set is most valuable in a growth company. I'm best suited at building teams and shipping products in a company that's got a strong customer base. And in a downside scenario, my skills of new product innovation were not as valuable. You need to find a way to make it about a skill mismatch, not my boss was a dick. So again, same pattern all the time. give a brief answer to what's asked, and then move to the next thing. All right. Let's see what else we got. You guys have been given some answer. My layoff was part of an overall department restructuring. Font fire, that's a completely reasonable answer. There's a picture of these over there. No, I don't need any more. I see empty glasses on my staff. That's what's important. So this is a leadership lesson, right? Leaders eat last. There's a picture of the Cherrylicious bourbon drink, and it's going for my mod 40 Pink Dragons and my producer Awesome Dave. That's how you want to lead. Ciao. Cheers. Pilum 2, is it in front of a live audience? Funny you would mention that. So, it's in front of only my producer and my moderator at the moment. However, we're actually going to be opening up the studio in the future in Seattle to a live audience, a small live audience. We use bullet bourbon, Sean, a small live audience. And because of the way we do things, for ticket prices, we'll probably accept bottles of wine. So someday, if you're in the greater Seattle region, you can get in touch with us. And if we're doing a show here, we'll do a small live studio audience by invite only. I know Hephaestus is local. How many years? Won't be long. We need an electrician to finish some work in the studio. So if someone knows a local electrician who wants to work affordably to help Awesome Dave finish the wiring, this is your place. Direct message 40 Pink Dragons or plus David. You meant the wine here. All right. Yeah. Well, it depends. I'm a fan of port, but we can talk. And so port, you want vintage years. So we're completely off the reservation now about interview questions. But yes, the way to my heart is vintage port. Coffee is for closers. Completely true. Victor TV, can you tell me about your biggest failure? So many to think of. Kind of off target, but that question is common and it's on the list here. So I'll take that and we'll do that one next. Then we'll go back to things people have voted on. But this was submitted in Discord. You're often asked, can you tell me about a failure? Can you tell me about a time where you didn't succeed? Can you tell me about a time where you struggled? What was your biggest failure? As I've said, this is a story you should have already ready to go. So you should know both what you're going to describe and how you're going to describe what you did about it. So one of my biggest failures, for example, was when I launched Amazon Video, what became Prime Video. We were launching, this is a long time ago, 13 years ago. And when we launched, we were launching a download service on Windows Media Player. And it turned out Windows Media Player DRM failed 3, 4, 5% of the time, which meant customers had a 1 in 30 to 1 in 20 chance of buying something from us and it wouldn't work. They couldn't play it when they got it. So 1 in 20 customers not being able to use your product is a catastrophically high failure rate when you're selling things at scale. So that was basically a disaster. So my failure was specifically, I had recommended a beta test program where we were going to test out in the wild to find this out. My management wanted to have a surprise launch, and so they didn't want a public beta. The result is, as I often joke, that the surprise they got was the product didn't work. But my failure was not either catching it and testing or fighting hard enough to get that beta program. So when you're asked this question, basically you want to talk about 3 things. What was the failure? What did you learn? And what are you going to do differently in the future? So what I learned was, for a new software product, a beta test, a controlled test, but with a large, diverse audience is required. And now I simply won't launch something without that. And if I were forced to, or if I had no choice, I would get explicit sign-off about the risk that there could be undetectable errors at scale. So those are the things I do. So to answer that question well, yeah, not even 1 sigma. That's right, dimethyl. It was a terrible result. You absolutely want to answer this question with a real failure, what you learned, and what you're going to do differently. Now, there's nuance to that, but let's go to the next submitted question, which is what should I do if I don't know how to solve a coding problem? Admit I don't know or waste time and try to learn? So this is domain specific. The right thing to do here is be candid and say, I'm not sure I know the solution to this one, but I'd like to keep working on it. Can you give me a hint or some direction? I think there's something I'm not seeing. Most coding interviewers will give you, they have some hint. Now, you're not going to get full points on the question, but being transparent and engaging, you can talk people through, because remember, and I talk about this all the time in interviews, so much of interviewing is based on how the person feels about you. That isn't going to overcome the fact that you didn't know the answer to one specific question, but you can ask them for a hint or direction. You can also punt and say, I really don't know the answer to this question. I think maybe it involves using a red-black tree, and I don't honestly remember how to put together a red-black tree, so I don't think I'm going to be able to answer it. Can we move on to another question? There's a number of different ways to try to manage that. And if you have a whole day of interviewing, you can get past one missed question. To give you an idea, and this is common in a lot of companies, basically I think everywhere, there's a set of people who interview you and then they vote. And if they have a system where they vote explicitly or they're going to vote later, the bottom line is most people, at least at Amazon, are hired even though at least one person has voted no. And the reason is we teach people, if you're not sure, if you're not certain that you should hire, vote no, default to no. And we can argue whether or not that's right or good or whatever, but we prefer, unfortunately, to miss out on the occasional talented person than to bring in a bunch of people who might be good enough but maybe aren't. So we opt towards only selecting the people we're sure about. But the point is, very good. It is interesting. It's a trade-off. Do you want more false negatives or more false positives? Right? A false negative is where someone would have been good and you turn them down. And a false positive is where you bring someone in and you've hired them and it turns out you were too optimistic. So being too optimistic is super painful, right? It means that you've got a person, they're not going to succeed in the job or they're really going to struggle. They're going to need a lot of investment. You may have to try and find them a new job or ultimately let them go. That isn't a really good question. So DT Twitch Talk is asking, so wait, 3 yeses and a no is still a pass or needs to be 4 passes? It's not that simple. The 4 people get together and talk afterwards, and we ask the person with the no vote, hey, tell me about why. How severe was it? Did someone else get a different response on the same type of question? So for example, if there are 2 coding interviews, if someone did well on one but kind of poorly on another, we may be willing to say, well, how did they do overall? So it's not, this is not strict math. There are humans involved, which is why I've said several times, how you interact with the people really matters. So going into an interview, by the way, with a chip on your shoulder, generally doesn't work in your favor. I'm probably going to do a show sometime in the future about anger and frustration in the workplace, but I know some people who interview angry. And that's not really a good call. right? Taking like all the anger you have about not having a job or the frustration or desperation about your last manager or how it was unfair or what, taking that into your next interview, um, uh, not a really good technique. So, bottom line is, what I want to be clear about though, if you get hit with one of these hard questions or you struggle in one part of one interview, it's very difficult, but try not to let that throw off the rest of your day because you can still recover and get hired at a lot of places with a less than perfect score, however you want to look at it. Particularly if you knock it out of the park with somebody else. I mentioned earlier, Amazon favors only taking people that we feel comfortable or confident about, but we don't expect perfection in people. Every interview has some sort of problem or warts or whatever. And there's very few cases where everyone comes through at the end and says, I just totally loved Amanda's approach to this. Amanda is a great candidate. We have to hire Amanda, blah, blah, blah. That's very rare. So if something goes wrong, just keep on keeping on. Yeah, as an interviewer, I never see a perfect candidate. And Hephaestus is one of our longtime leaders in this chat. It's just rare to see that. So one of the things people submitted in Discord is if you have a gap in your resume and you're asked about a gap in your resume, the answers to gap in your resume are very similar to the answers for why didn't you finish college, only easier, usually. Assuming that there's a reason or an explanation or something you did during that gap in your resume that's positive, you can actually spin it into something really positive. So Tim Ferriss talks about this for the 4-hour work week and people who take sabbatical years to travel the world. And they're like, oh, should I put that on my resume? And the answer is absolutely. And the reason that you put that on your resume is basically most of your interviewers are going to be jealous. Like they would like to take a year off to go see the world or whatever it is you did that was cool. I took a year off to work for a charity. I took a year off even to care for aging parents. These are all understandable things. They make you more of a real person, relatable and believable. Duke of Thought, I have a gap because I've been looking for a job. Not the strongest answer. I was busy looking for a new job because if it's been that long, that will lead people to wonder what's wrong with you that you haven't found a job. And I'm sorry that sounds unfair. And I know, Duke, you have been looking, but you want to talk about what you're learning during that, what you've been using that time for, right? You want to be able to say what you've been doing with that time. So, for example, there was a woman, I do resume reviews. You can learn about it on my website. But if you want me to do a review of your resume and it's not on stream in one of the resume review shows, I do it and you can ask for it on my website and I charge a small fee for it. But she came to me for a resume review. She had a gap, but she'd been taking all these classes during her gap. And so I said, put that on your resume and say, look, I was pursuing the education that would allow me to get the next job I wanted. But whatever you've been doing, you need to make some story that's better than, hey, I was, laying at home, chilling out, doing kind of nothing in particular. Even then, you have to turn that into some sort of story about, I had the luxury of taking a year off to spend time with family and to catch up on personal projects I really cared about. And it's brought me great energy and internal motivation now that I'm well rested to jump back into work. So you have to turn it into a story about how you're eager. Because look, let's be honest, let's talk about this. What does every interviewer want to know about you? Can I work with this person? Do I like them? Can they do the job? Are they going to do the job? That's pretty much it. Can they do the job? Are they going to do the job? Can I stand them? Ideally, can I enjoy them? That's what an interviewer is trying to figure out. So you've got to fit your stories to that mold. Hephaestus, exactly right. As a manager, am I going to have to fire this person in 3 months? Because look, it's fun to imagine that we managers love to be like powerful tyrants and like, you suck, get out of here. Don't let the door hit you in the ass. Even if we get away with that legally, it's actually no fun. If someone's been a complete jerk, that might be fun. But if they're trying and you invested in them and you made the choice to bring them here, as a manager, you feel responsible. And so you feel a sense of failure. And so if you hire someone that doesn't fit and now you have to go let them go after coaching them, you've failed at least twice. You brought in someone, you made the wrong choice on that list of can they do the job? Will they do the job? Can I work with them? Somewhere you and your team made a mistake. That's failure one. Then you've spent your time trying to work with them, whatever the problem is, and fix it. That's failure two. So now you have two of your own failures that you have to go look this person in the eye and say, hey, unfortunately, today's going to be your last day at Acme Inc. Subtitle, because I made two wrong choices and it turns out you can't do the job we need you to and you don't fit with the team. It can be that those things are true, that this isn't a place you fit, but I failed twice and have to go face that. And then I have to go hire again. So, while it's fun to imagine, and like Trump back before he was president on The Apprentice loved to say, you're fired. Like that was his tagline. It's not that way in real life. Yeah, so referrals are even more difficult. You're letting go somebody who was recommended. They have friends. By the way, as a manager, you can't normally explain to others. But you can't explain why you're letting someone go. So they're like, why did you fire Amanda? And meanwhile, well, Amanda never came to work. But you can't, it's her personal business. You can't say, because of rules and privacy, you can't say why you let someone go, usually. And so as a manager, you're taking the heat, even though Amanda's work wasn't very good. Amanda was well-liked. Why was she well-liked? Because instead of doing her job, she spent all of her time socializing and chatting up others and being friendly and whatever. She was very popular, but not very good. And as the manager, you're the bad guy. Wah, big tears for us. That's fine. But the point is, firing people is no fun. Tell me about yourself. Why, thank you for asking. I'd love to. Oh, you mean in an interview? Okay. So you're asked this question in an interview. It depends on when you're asked it. Some people ask it as a way of breaking the ice. They ask it at the beginning. Hey, tell me about yourself. What they're asking, what they're really doing is it's partly a way to warm up the interview and get a little context. And it's also a way to see what you might say that's not on your resume. But generally, what people aren't looking for here, and I can certainly say drives me nuts the few times people have done it to me, is your entire life story. They are not looking for, well, I was born in a small village in country Fu, and 35 minutes later, you're still talking. They're looking for some solid summary statement. They're looking for some solid, reasonable summary statement of your main interest and your main history. So I would say I'm an experienced executive with a long track record of delivering projects and building teams. And now I have the opportunity to look for my next challenge where I'm very interested in blah, blah, blah. You can say more, you can say less, but they're looking for 3 minutes, not 30, is my belief. Tell me about yourself is also a chance to showcase your positives or your superpowers. It's not a place where you need to throw in a bunch of bad stuff. Some people have trouble talking positively about yourself. This is one of those questions that gets asked a lot. And so I would practice my answer, and I would practice it with others until you had it smooth and until it was positive. This isn't a place to be, well, I'm a pretty good developer, or, well, I'm a decent artist and I really love to draw. Like, this is too little. It's a chance to sell yourself. If you do have special abilities that don't show up on your resume or things you want to emphasize, but this is basically, if you've seen my work with Devin, where we're preparing people for the Twitch pitch, the show we're going to do where you can pitch us ideas and we'll give you feedback on them. This is your pitch of yourself. This is your elevator pitch of yourself. 3 reasons we shouldn't hire you. This is a tough question. It's kind of a jerk question. I would honestly say, well, I would turn this into what is your biggest weakness? I would give someone one weakness and do my weakness story I had prepared and see if they say, well, what about 2 more? And then say, well, I'd have to think about that. But I would try to get out of this and not list 3. And I'd also wonder about the manager. In a case like this is not what I would call a great question. While a lot of these are hard questions, I think asking someone like, I could ask you for your 12 weaknesses. I could say, well, I've got an hour in this interview. What I'd like you to do is itemize weaknesses. Start with the biggest and we'll see how far you get. Like, I'd be very skeptical. I'd also say someone who asks a question for your 3 greatest weaknesses isn't on your side very much. Like, that interview is probably not going to go well. But if I had to answer this, I say, well, I've learned a lot about myself in my career, or even if you haven't in your college, I've tried to learn a lot about myself in college or whatever. I know there's several things that I could be better at. One of them is, another is. This is what I'm doing, blah, blah, blah. But I would try to keep the answer to this short and same script. Address the question, talk about what you've learned, talk about how you manage around it or what you do about it. This is the standard script for negative questions. Don't run away from the question. Talk about what you've learned or what you are aware of. Talk about what you're doing about it. Move on. So, pretty great short recipe. Let me jump in though and say, what methods can you use to eliminate bias while conducting an interview? Prevent first 5-second judgment. Okay. As a candidate, I'm not sure there's that much you can do to prevent bias. As an interviewer, and Cup of Mangoes, I like that question. Remind me at the end of the show when we're doing social stuff and I'll answer it. What can you do as an interviewer? The first thing is be aware that you're going to tend to jump to a conclusion. Be aware that you're going to try and jump, this is live, to a conclusion and fight that. Second thing is be willing to change your mind. The way you know you're getting by bias is if your mind keeps changing during the interview. Like, oh, that was a good answer. I think maybe yes. Ooh, that was a rough answer. Maybe not. As opposed to if you're like, boy, this person's terrible and I can't find anything good. Wow, they're really bad. Oh my God, where's the button that drops them through the floor? Now, some candidates will be terrible. But if you're doing enough interviews, you find a way to know that you at least are changing back and forth and you have openness. So now as a candidate, what can you do to eliminate bias? This one's really tough as a candidate. I'm actually going to ask chat. I don't have a good answer for this. And when I don't know, I'll admit it. I'm going to think about it for a second. But if there's somebody in chat that has a good idea that as a candidate, what can you do? There's famous stories how they eliminated bias in interviews for orchestras. They found that women weren't being hired to play in orchestras, But when they had the people doing the hiring judge only by the music and they couldn't see the candidate, so the candidate played from behind a screen, they the ratio of hiring suddenly changed a lot. So Hephaestus is usually pretty smart on this. He says you can play bias to your advantage as a candidate. For example, people like others who smile and display a positive attitude. Yes, you can totally do things to make yourself welcoming and to give people a desire to work with you. So you can play on their biases. And that's basically where you mirror them and you be authentic, as Torridus says, you mirror their body language, you dress appropriately for the business, and you basically try and opt in to their tribalism. However, it is hard. Let's say that you fear that someone is biased because you're female or because you're from another country or you have an accent. How would I dress for an Amazon interview? So that's a fine question. Amazon is a casual company. It's jeans and t-shirts, jeans and fleece. The general rule for any company is dress slightly better than the average dress. So you want to look nice, but not out of sorts for that company. So that's what you're after. Those meeps, people dislike me in 5 seconds or less. Well, that's a pretty tough. I hope that's not true. But if that is true, you need to look for why that is. Look, some people, and I don't know if this is true of you, but some people are just assholes. And if that is you, because somebody's got to be the asshole, and you often rub people wrong or are abrupt, go learn about EQ and go learn how not to do those things. Now, I'm assuming you're teasing, but social skills matter, and in interviews, they really matter. I'll tell a story. My father, wonderful man, he told me when I was going to interview with the professor I went to grad school with at Purdue, and there are some Purdue grads here, he said, you know, Ethan, maybe when you go interview, you should talk as little as possible because sometimes stuff you say just isn't that positive. Basically, he's like, your mouth gets you in trouble, so say less. So that was, and it was honest, heartfelt advice. He was trying to help me out. You know, he felt that I should say less and be smarter about what I said. And I probably didn't learn anything from that. And I did get into Purdue anyway. But, you know, if you're the sort of person, I'm so blunt. And back then I was very unfiltered. I got myself in trouble a lot. Oh, the book is How to Win Friends and Influence People. So it's an old book now. But yeah, it's about how to make a good first impression. That's Dale Carnegie. It's probably been, or Dale Carnegie. You can say it either way. Books like that are totally reasonable ways to learn the skills to make a good first impression. Firm handshake, all that stuff. And that book is as old as dirt. You're right. But Carnegie kind of set our current culture in many ways. A lot of our business culture. Okay, we'll do one or two more. How would you answer a programming question that you don't exactly know how to write? Is explaining by words how the code flow should do enough? No, but it's better than nothing. So we kind of covered this earlier in the show. Basically, if you don't know how to answer a programming question, you answer it as best you can. You ask for hints where you're stuck, and you fall back to pseudocode and then algorithms if you have to. So the ideal answer to a coding question, I know the non-coders are like, who cares? I don't want to know what's this doing in here. And that's why I'm answering it a little bit quickly. The ideal thing is that you thoughtfully bang out syntactically correct, error-free, beautiful code. Add comments. Yay, gold star. Okay, you can't do that. The next best thing is pseudocode out the algorithm. Most interviewers will accept that. The next best thing is talk through your thinking. This is the partial credit thing on every test in college. Show your work. So if you don't know how to answer it, you show your work and you say, I think I might be missing something. I'm getting hung up somewhere here. I get that I should be seeing this, but can you give me a hint? Those are basically the things you do. You could generalize this to any hiring test. That's true. It doesn't have to be coding. Thank you, Festus. And hello world is always the right answer, except when it's 42. So you're right on any question. Basically, the right answer is to blow through it. You know it perfectly. But if you don't, to give an outline answer, which is equivalent to pseudocode, to give the details you have. And if you can't even do that, talk through your thought process. So interviewers are more interested in how you think or how you're working on a problem. They should be anyway. Good interviewers at good companies are not trying to figure out, do you have specific knowledge? They're trying to figure out, do you understand how to solve problems? And can you work through challenges and work with a team to do it? So if you show that, you're better off than not. All right, that was cool. Good question. How much time should you put into writing and memorizing stock answers to common behavioral interviewing questions? So first, if you don't know what a behavioral interview question is, there's this correct, in my opinion, idea that the best predictor of future performance is past performance. So you want to talk about, hey, you want to find out, what did this person do in a similar situation before? What you don't want to do is ask a hypothetical. Well, what would you do if you found yourself in conflict with someone? Because people will be like, I don't know, I'll make up whatever I think you want to hear. Instead, they want to know what you really did. And so that's a behavioral interview question. How much time should you put into writing and memorizing stock answers? Probably not that much. What I would do instead is you want to think through your career and be good at what were the key events in your career, positive and negative, things that went well, things that didn't go as well, places where you learned, places where you were happy and effective, places where you struggled, situations that fit you and don't. And then when you're asked one of these behavioral questions, because there are so many, you have a set of stories you've thought about that you can adapt to the question on the fly. Behavioral interviewing is super well known at this point, though. And so if it helps you, you can absolutely go out and figure out a list of questions to go practice on. But it's more about being comfortable with expressing your life experience and different situations that you've both been in, good situations and bad situations. And so you want to be comfortable talking on the fly, if you can. I know, by the way, it's unfortunate that how I talked about this at the beginning of the show, but I'm sure a lot of different people have come into the channel since then. It's important to be able to the degree you can, think on your feet and answer quickly. But you won't always be able to do that. The point, though, in interviewing is it's unfortunate that interviews aren't really about your skills. They're about how well you answer questions. And a lot of your career and life is going to depend on that because these are pivotal moments. You interview, you get the job, your career and life go one way. You interview, you don't get the job, your career and life go another way. Being good in interviewing, you'd rather get the job, be offered the job and turn it down than not be offered the job and not have that chance. To be good in interviewing, if you're not naturally well-spoken and quick on your feet, means practicing going through all the hard questions here and being ready, and then also knowing your career so you can speak to it. So we've done other shows on how to succeed in an interview. This show is really how not to get blown up. So on this, I would concentrate more on knowing the key stories of my career. All right, we got to sign off at this point because dinner's waiting I have an inch of drink to finish, and we have to get Awesome Dave to his plane. This has been a ton of fun. We're going to keep all the questions in the queue. Feel free to put more in or to come to our Discord. We'll be back in 46 and a half hours, 6 p.m. Pacific, Tuesday night. We'll revisit and answer the questions in the queue. We'll keep them coming. You're all incredibly welcome. I hope you followed the channel. I hope you keep voting on questions. And I really appreciate the engagement, all of you answering the questions and giving things here. This is so much fun helping you. If, like the Rex 243, you get a job or you're able to apply some of this, we totally want you to come into our Discord and jump into the community success channel. Tell us about what you've done and how it's worked out for you, because we do have people in chat who aren't able to find jobs right now, and they're interviewing unsuccessfully or they're struggling, and it helps them to hear that there is a way out and they're not alone. I also have a stream suggestions channel. I do streams all the time based on what the audience told me. This stream is based on what one of my channel advisors asked for, and the engagement shows it was a good call. This will be up on our YouTube in the future if you need to go back to it. So that's a lot of things I've said. I'm going to cut it off. Thank you all for being here. I appreciate you very much. If you feel so moved, sub to the channel so you can use the famous blue shirt that is our icon. Otherwise, no need to. We love you here. And for that, any further questions, put them in, and we'll see you in 48 hours. Hi, I'm Ethan Evans. I hope you've gotten a lot out of this show. To follow us on YouTube, please click the bell icon in the bottom left and subscribe. Also, you can find us live on Twitch, where we answer questions interactively. Further, we have a Discord community, where not only I, but other members of the community team up to answer your questions interactively. Hope you've enjoyed. Thank you.